his grandparents in a remote village, and he was to stay alone for 3 days. The first night passed quietly and without incident, but on the second night, everything changed. After dinner, David settled down to watch a horror movie on TV. Suddenly, he heard a noise from the front door. Cautiously, he went to check and opened the door, but there was nothing but the silence of the night. David told himself that perhaps the noise he had heard was just his imagination. But when he turned back to the TV, he noticed that the movie had ended, and the screen was black. He reached for the remote and started pressing buttons, but the TV did not respond. Annoyed, David put the remote aside and decided to go to his room to sleep. Walking through the dark hallway, he felt as if someone was watching him from behind. When he looked back, he saw nothing, but he felt he was not alone. David hurried to his room and closed the door behind him. In his room, he hid under the covers and tried to fall asleep. However, strange noises came from the ceiling and walls. The sound of heavy footsteps, the scratching of nails on wood, and a soft whisper calling his name. David knew he had to last until morning. But could he? Were these sounds real, or was he just imagining things? And if they were real, who or what was in the house? David had crawled under his blanket, and his eyes had closed heavily into sleep. Suddenly, around 3 a.m., the sound of thunder woke him up. He thought that perhaps all the strange events that had passed through his mind an hour ago were just hallucinations stemming from loneliness. The rain was pouring down heavily, and in one part of the room, water was dripping from the ceiling. David decided to turn on the light and go to the spot where the water was dripping to get a container. But when he pressed the light switch, he realized that the power was out. He had to navigate the darkness of the house, walk through the hallway, and go to the kitchen to get a container. David picked up the container and left the kitchen. When he glanced behind him in the hallway, he suddenly saw something that nearly made him have a heart attack from fright. A creature with a very scary and terrifying face was looking at him. Its eyes were red and glowing, and it had a crooked, sinister smile. David jumped back and dropped the container. The sound of the container breaking echoed in the silence of the house. He ran quickly towards his room, but the creature continued to follow him from behind. David reached his room and closed the door with all his might. His breaths were heavy and irregular, and his heart pounded in his chest. He leaned against the wall and tried to calm himself, but the sound of nails scratching on the door of his room terrified him. David knew he couldn't stay in the room until morning. He had to do something. Cautiously, he went to the window and opened it. The rain was still falling heavily, and a cold wind began to blow. David looked outside and saw another creature, similar to the one he had seen in the hallway, standing in the yard. He realized that this was only the beginning of the nightmare. If you enjoyed it so far, please hit the subscribe button if you liked the video. David, still under the blanket, was contemplating a way to escape the nightmare when suddenly the door opened. He looked towards the door in surprise, but there was no one behind it. Drenched in sweat from fear, he was startled. At that moment, he felt a heavy blow to his head, which knocked him unconscious. When David came to, it was morning, but something was not right. Fully regaining consciousness, he realized he was in the storeroom of the house. His heart was pounding abnormally fast from the intense fear. He quickly got up and headed towards his room. Upon reaching his room, he noticed the window was open and a cold breeze was entering. He spent the day haunted by the events and fears of the previous night, and the third night, when he was supposed to be alone, arrived. David had his dinner and returned to his room. The rain was pouring down heavily again. Feeling cold and shivering, he decided to put on some thick clothes from the wardrobe. saw another terrifying creature in the corner of the room, staring at him. This creature, with eyes glowing like burning coals and a mouth that seemed ready to let out a terrifying scream, silenced David. Unable to bear it any longer, he ran towards the door of the room and opened it. But as he ran into the hallway, he realized that with every step he took, more creatures appeared in every nook and cranny. He ran towards the stairs, but with each step he descended, the sound of the creature's footsteps behind him grew louder. David reached the basement and closed the door behind him. In the darkness of the basement, he searched for a place to hide, but the sound of moans and unpleasant whispers came from everywhere. David crawled into a corner and hid among the old shelves. He knew he had to last until morning, but could he? Was this just a nightmare, or was there a more terrifying reality waiting for him? David, with his heart pounding in his chest, returned to his room. The demonic and terrifying creature still stood in a corner of the room, but this time its gaze was one of anticipation. David, with a voice quivering with fear, asked, "You? What do you want from me?" The creature, with a voice that seemed to rise from the depths of the earth, replied, "I have not come to harm you, David. I have come to warn you." David, still unable to believe he was speaking to a demonic creature, asked, "A warning? About what?" "The house you live in is a place that lies between our world and yours. You must be careful. There are forces that want to use this house to enter your world." David, now feeling a bit more secure, asked, "So how can I protect myself?" The creature slowly approached him and said, "You must perform protective rituals. I will help you, but you must trust me." David, no longer feeling any fear, decided to listen to the creature's words. He followed the creature's instructions and performed the protective rituals. With each ritual, he felt a stronger force protecting him. The third night came to an end, and his family returned. David never told anyone what had happened to him during those 3 nights, but he knew that his house was now a safe place, and the demonic creature, which now acted as his protector, was always watching over him from the shadows.